All right, let's get right into it. We hear political speeches all the time, right? But how often do we actually stop and think about how they're built? I mean, word by word, phrase by phrase, all to get a specific job done. Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain and take a look at the political persuasion playbook. So, that's the big question, isn't it? How does a political speech really work? Is it just someone sharing their opinions? Or is it something more? Is it like a carefully engineered machine designed to sway audiences, justify actions, and literally shape our reality? To figure this out, we're diving into this really fascinating master's thesis. It does something you could call a linguistic autopsy on a 2024 speech given by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the UN. Basically, it puts the language under a microscope to show us all the hidden strategies at play. So here's our game plan for breaking down what the thesis found. First, we'll look at the tools used for the analysis. Then, we'll see how language can create a sharp us versus them divide. After that, we'll dig into the appeals to emotion and history, see how the bigger picture gets framed, and finally, we'll uncover the ultimate goal of this whole playbook, making actions seem legitimate. Okay, first things first, the anatomy of a speech. Before we can really get into the juicy findings, we've got to understand the tools the researchers used to take this speech apart. The main tool here is something called critical discourse analysis, or CDA. Now, think of it this way. CDA doesn't just see words as, words. It sees language as a way to do things in the world, to build power, create divisions, and justify actions. It's kind of like a special lens that helps you see the hidden blueprints of power and ideology, right there in the grammar. And this model is the specific framework they use. It breaks the speech down into 3 different levels. First, you've got the text itself, the actual words and sentences. Then there's the discursive practice, which is about how the speech is made and how we consume it. And finally, you zoom all the way out to the social practice, the huge impact that language has on society as a whole. So, now let's get into the first layer of the analysis. This is where it gets really interesting. We're going to start small, at the word level, and see how simple choices can be used to build a world of us versus them. It's pretty wild how something as basic as a pronoun can be turned into a powerful political weapon. The analysis finds that I is used to say, hey, I'm in charge, I'm responsible. We is used to create this positive, united team, the in-group. You is there to pull the audience in directly. But the really crucial one is they, which is used to define and push away a negative outgroup. And just look at this contrast here. It's laid out in black and white. The thesis points to the language used for the in-group, words like we, civilized societies. Now compare that to the language for the outgroup, they, savage enemies, murderous monsters. That linguistic gap, it's huge, and according to the analysis, it's completely intentional. Now this whole strategy of setting up polar opposites, well, it has a name, antithesis. It's a classic move in rhetoric. You frame the world in these simple binary terms, good versus evil, light versus dark, us versus them. The whole point is to get rid of any gray area, any nuance, and force you to make a really clear, simple choice. And here we go, a direct quote from the speech that the thesis flags as a textbook example. This one sentence takes a super complex situation and boils it all down to a simple moral choice. According to the analysis, that's not an accident. That is the strategy. Okay, so next up, the analysis moves from single word choices to the much bigger stories being told. This is all about how deep-seated emotions and historical memories get pulled in to shape how we see what's happening right now. To really get the references in the speech, the thesis gives us a quick history refresher. We're talking about huge events like the division of Palestine in 1948, the 1967 war, and the Oslo Peace Accords in the 90s. This history is the backdrop for everything else we're about to see. So here, the thesis points out a really powerful use of historical analogy. This quote, which compares current events to the Holocaust, is highlighted by the researchers as a very deliberate strategy. The idea is to trigger these incredibly strong emotions like fear and sympathy, and to place the current conflict inside a much bigger story about survival and existential threats. The analysis also uncovers this deep layer of religious history that's woven all through the speech. So by talking about the Promised Land, quoting Moses, or mentioning King Solomon, political claims stop sounding like modern arguments. Instead, they're framed as ancient, sacred rights that have been handed down from on high. All right, let's zoom out and see how all of these pieces fit together to create the bigger picture. The analysis now looks at the overarching frames and metaphors that are used to package the whole argument for a global audience. Metaphors are amazing, aren't they? They create these instant mental images. The thesis pulls apart a few key ones, like the long arm of Israel, which just paints this picture of incredible power and reach, or calling the UN a swamp, which suggests it's this toxic, murky, dangerous place. These aren't just clever phrases, they're entire frames for understanding the world. Now, to really analyze these big frames, the thesis brings in another major theory, post-colonialism. The key idea for us here is this historical habit of splitting the world into two. You have the Occident, or the West, which is seen as rational and advanced, and then you have the Orient, or the East, which is often painted as chaotic, emotional, and inferior. And boom, this is where it all clicks into place. The thesis argues that the speech plugs directly into that old colonial binary. It presents the conflict as not just one nation against another, but as a huge clash of civilizations, the rational, civilized world on one side and a barbaric, dangerous enemy on the other. And that brings us to the final and maybe the most important part of the analysis. What's the endgame here? Why go to all this trouble with these complex linguistic strategies? Well, the thesis argues it all comes down to one primary goal. The research uses a theory of legitimation that basically lays out a three-step recipe. Step 1, you appeal to powerful emotions like fear and anger. Step 2, you present a hypothetical future, a clear choice between a blessing and a curse. And step 3, you claim you're being altruistic, that your actions aren't selfish but are for the greater good. This is what's called framing it as a just war. So here's the bottom line. The thesis concludes that when you add it all up, the us versus them language, the emotional and historical appeals, the civilizational framing, the single biggest goal is to make political and military actions seem necessary, just, and defensive to the entire world. So the main takeaway from this whole academic breakdown is a really powerful one. It suggests that political language is almost never just off the cuff. It's more like architecture. It's meticulously designed to build a certain version of reality, to draw really clear lines between us and them, and, at the end of the day, to justify action. And that kind of leaves us with one final thought. What this analysis gives us is a framework, like a decoder ring for political talk. So the next time you're listening to any political leader from any country, what are you going to listen for now? The pronouns? The metaphors? The hidden good versus evil story? What will you hear now that you might have just missed before?